in any ecosystem, there is a special relationship between all the living organisms existing in this ecosystem and with their environment. So an ecosystem is the interaction of all the living organisms with each other. So all the living organisms are interacting together, and this interaction is in the form of energy flow, which is in the form of feeding. They take their energy from each other. They feed on each other. And they are not only interacting with each other, they are also interacting, their interaction with the non-living parts of the environment. So all the living organisms existing in a certain place are interacting together. They depend on each other, and they are interacting with the rest of the environment. A non-living part of the environment will include water, it will include the buildings, the soil, the minerals, the air. So that's the non-living part of the environment. Before we have a look at this interaction, you have to be familiar with certain terms. We have to know what's meant by a species, a population, community, and habitat. So what's a species? A species is a group of living organisms that have similar characteristics, they have similar features, they have similar anatomy, and they can reproduce, they can mate together, and they can get fertile offsprings. So that's the best way in order to identify two organisms as being of the same species, that they can reproduce and they can give rise to fertile offsprings. Although nowadays scientists started to depend on something else in order to see if they are from the same species or not. And not always can we wait to see the offsprings after they grow, if they are fertile or not. The reproductive cycle might be too long. Or sometimes a researcher will have only one gender. He will have only a female, he doesn't have a male. He doesn't know which species it is. Or it might be just fossils. It might be things that have extinct. So they started to depend on the DNA structure. They started to analyze the structure of the DNA to see if organisms are closely related or not. They started to analyze the DNA structure. The more the DNA is similar, the more these species are closely related. They start to see the sequence of bases. They start to see the genes. The greater the similarities in the DNA, this means that these are from the same species. The differences in the DNA, we're going to take this later in the genetic, it arises from mutations. So mutations are always happening. And mutation always gives changes, which is the base of evolution. So a species can evolve due to mutations happening in the DNA and changes happening in the environment. Okay? But for this to bring about a new species, it requires many, many, many years and generations. We're speaking at least 100 years. علشان mutation حصلت brings rise to a new species, for a new species to evolve, that it requires 100 years. They have methods to get the DNA out. Yes, the bones. Okay? لا الDNA بتاع الorganism نفسه. يعني if he has some fossils, if he has some bones, remains, he extracts the DNA from it and he analyzes the DNA. فهو مثلا he has fossils of 2 different animals. But he can get the DNA from these fossils and he starts to examine the 2 DNA ويشوف الsimilarities اللي بينهم. فيعرف هما they had the same ancestor or not. يعني they were once the same species or not. Okay? A population is a group of organisms all from the same species and they are living in the same place at the same time. Okay? For example, all the humans, all the human beings found in Alexandria, now we are the human population of Alexandria. We are of the same species. We're living in the same area at the same period of time. Okay? Community is all the different organisms, all the different populations living in the same place at the same time. So the community of Alexandria will include all the human beings, all the donkeys, the cats, the horses, the flies, the mosquitoes, the bacteria, the fungi, the trees, the grass, the birds. All these are forming the community. All the different living organisms existing in the same place at the same time. And the habitat is the place where these living organisms are living, feeding, sheltering, reproducing. It's the place where they exist. That's the habitat. Okay? Let's have a look at a relationship between these living organisms. These living organisms have a relation known as the food chain. The food chain is the transfer of energy, and when I say energy, I mean food. That's the energy that's being transferred. So it's the transfer of energy between organisms in a certain ecosystem. So in any ecosystem, the food chain always starts by a producer. So the producer is always occupying the first trophic level, the first feeding level. And what is a producer? It's an autotrophic organism. Because not all autotrophic organisms are plants. You have some autotrophic bacteria, you have autotrophic protists, but not all autotrophs are plants. So a producer is an autotrophic organism that can make its own organic substances. The producer can absorb light energy and it converts this light energy into chemical energy, which is the organic substances. And then consumers will start to take their energy from the producer. They will feed on the producer and take this chemical energy. Consumers are all heterotrophs. They are heterotrophic organisms. They feed on other organisms. The consumers can either be herbivores, and these are plant eaters. So herbivores are always found in the second trophic level because they always feed on producers. So they must always come as primary consumers. Primary consumers are those feeding on producers. Or consumers can be carnivores, which feed on meat. They feed on other animals. But carnivores always come at higher trophic levels. They can be second consumers. They can be tertiary consumers. They are always found at higher tropic level. The primary consumer is the second tropic level. The second consumer is the third tropic level. The tertiary consumer is the fourth tropic level.
So tropic level
feeding level. The tropic level is the feeding level. The level of feeding in the food chain. So the producer is the first feeding level. Okay? Omnivores that can feed either on plants or animals, they can be found anywhere in the food chain, either a primary consumer or a secondary consumer. Okay? Right. When the producers absorb the light energy and convert it into chemical energy, not all the energy absorbed is going to pass to the primary consumer. So not all the energy found in one tropic level passes to the second tropic level or to the third tropic level. In each tropic level, energy is being lost. Energy is lost in each tropic level in the form of heat energy during respiration. So all the organisms are respiring and losing heat energy. This is energy lost at each tropic level. Not all parts are eaten. So the primary consumer, when it feeds on the producer, it might eat the leaves of the plant. It will not eat the roots. It will not eat the stems and the branches. So these have a lot of energy, chemical energy lost. The consumer doesn't digest all this energy. It doesn't digest all the food it ate. Some is passed out in the feces. Some is passed in excretions. So there is energy losses in each tropic level. Energy lost in respiration as heat energy. Energy lost in the undigested food in the feces as chemical energy. Energy lost in excretions, energy lost in movements. And because energy lost at each tropic level, food chains tend to be short. You will not find a food chain with more than 4 or 5 tropic levels. Because at the end of the food chain, the amount of energy available in this tropic level is not enough to support another population. Any other population trying to feed on this tropic level will get extinct. It will not have enough energy to exist. There will be too much competition. The amount of food available will not be enough to support the population. Yes. Yes. Usually, علشان energy is getting less, the food available is getting less.
ازاي getting less بس ممكن الانيمال يكون اكبر
هو that's the point. انت كل لما size of the animal increases, it's feeding on a larger amount from the lower tropic level. But by the time, يعني for example مثلا, if you are in a certain habitat, so the producer is a field of grass. So you have, for example, 100 rabbits living on this field, okay? And then you have some foxes feeding on the rabbits. So the 100 rabbits will not support a very large population of foxes. If the population is too big, there would be too much competition and they would start to die. If it could support, for example, مثلا, a population of 50 foxes, 30 foxes. If you have hyenas feeding on those foxes, so the 50 foxes will not support more than 10 hyenas. So the amount of energy in the hyenas and those 10 hyenas will not support another population. No other population will be able to exist on this small amount of food. Okay? Whatever, it depends. It depends. It depends on the amount of energy available. عشان كده بقول لك الامount of الفود chain, الsize بتاعها depends على the amount of energy found in the food chain. So you can find a food chain existing with only 3 tropic levels. You can find another one with 4, you can find another one with 5, but most probably you will not find anything with more than 5 tropic levels. Okay? And that's why it's usually better to feed a large human population as primary consumers rather than secondary consumers. Usually, developing countries, poor countries that have very large populations, you find the main source of food in these countries plants. يعني احنا مثلا عندنا main source of food food. That's a plant. You can feed 100 million people full. You can have enough to feed them, but you will not have enough chicken and meat to feed the 100 million.
But that's not financial reasons.
Yes, ما أنا بقول لك usually if you have a very large population and a poor country, it's better to feed them at lower tropic levels because then you will have more food to support this population. دايما البوبوليشنز الكبيرة بتلاقي المين سورس اوف فود بتاعهم is a kind of plant.
بس البلد اصلا فيها انرجي اكتر فكده
مش حكاية انرجي اكتر، الانرجي هنا احنا بنتكلم على الاماونت of food available. When I say amount of energy, I mean the amount of food available to support the population.
كل ما بنعدي كده الجرام بس.
بس هو انا ينفع اقول ان الانرجي سنتين على الميتابوليك اكشنز؟
لا انت بتقولي lost in ايه؟
ما هي كده لاست بالنسبه
كله lost.
يعني ينفع اقول
نفس الحاجات اللي بتبقى lost في كله. respiration, movement, growth. لا metabolic reactions الزهور ما بتاخدش. excretions, digestions, uneaten parts. Okay? The energy remaining in any tropic level, the energy that has not been lost and has not been consumed, the energy remaining in any of these tropic levels at the end is going to flow to the decomposers. So any energy remaining in any of the tropic levels which has not been lost is going to flow at the end to the consumers. So all the uneaten parts, all the digestions, all the excretions, all the dead organisms in any tropic level will end up at the decomposers. The decomposers are either bacteria or fungi, and they have a very important role. They recycle the raw materials. They bring back the raw materials to their original form so the plants can reuse them, and they avoid accumulation of wastes. What do they do? So the decomposer, for example, the bacteria, and this bacteria has some dead leaves. So that's the energy remaining in the tropic level. It has some dead leaves. What's the bacteria going to do? The bacteria is feeding on these dead leaves. How is it going to feed? It's going to secrete extracellular enzymes. Do you know what's meant by extracellular enzymes? Enzymes that are made inside the cell, but they diffuse outside where they carry out the digestion. So enzymes are made inside the cells, and they can either work intracellular, they can either work inside the cell, or they can work extracellular, outside the cell. For example, مثلا, a respiratory enzyme is an intracellular enzyme. The enzyme made inside the cell and catalyzes a reaction occurring inside the cell. But a digestive enzyme, like for example the pepsin, that's an extracellular enzyme. It's made inside the cell, then it diffuses out and works outside the cell. Okay? So decomposers, they secrete extracellular enzymes. They secrete proteases and carbohydrases. Carbohydrases is going to break down the carbohydrates into simple sugars. So they are small, soluble, and they can diffuse back into the cell of the bacteria. The bacteria can use this sugar in respiration and release the energy needed for its vital activities. And during the process, it's going to release carbon dioxide during respiration. Thus bringing back the carbon dioxide for the plants to reuse. It's recycling the carbon. Okay? When it secretes proteases, the proteases are going to break down the proteins into amino acids, which are simple, soluble, and they can diffuse into the bacterial cell. The cell will use the amino acids to make its own proteins. And any excess amino acids will be deaminated, forming urea. And urea is released in the soil in the form of ammonium compounds, because urea is made of ammonia. So the bacteria is recycling the nitrogen back to the soil so the plant can reuse it again. A bacterial cell secretes enzymes like those secreted in our liver to carry out the same process of deamination. بس هنا is carried out in the soil by the decomposers. يعني a deamination that takes place in liver of mammals, exactly the same way bacteria decomposers can carry out deamination in the soil.